Hey folks, if you're looking for an in-depth review, you're in the right place. And today, I'm going to be taking a stab at Blue Brain Games' The House of Da Vinci 3. The concluding title in their point-and-click trilogy. I probably should have started with the other two, but Hop gifted me this one, so here we are. With the burning question of the day being, was this puzzler a masterpiece in the making, or did this house tour highlight a rotten foundation? I'm your host, Arlyeon. Let's find out together. When Leonardo da Vinci disappeared, it was up to his pupil, Giacomo, to track him down, an endeavor that not only tested the young man's resolve, but his loyalties as well, even as he unearthed a conspiracy that threatened the very fabric of time. A conspiracy that's in full swing, given the game kicks off with things going horribly awry as agents descend upon you, forcing your escape and complicating your intended reunion with your mentor. And that's about the crux of what I'm willing to get into, because I feel it'd be almost impossible to avoid spoilers, since a lot of the story beats in this particular title hinge on some rather pivotal plot points in the earlier games. And before you ask how I'm aware of that fact, I can place the blame on the extra useful Chronicles section on the main menu, which helpfully provided a solid enough summary of the story so far so I didn't feel overly lost. And that's despite the fact that it's a rather narratively dense experience. While some of it is light enough to digest, such as the notes and sketches Giacomo encounters during his explorations, the cutscene segments feel rather comprehensive, which makes sense given how much they serve to drive the story forward. These are admittedly skippable for the truly puzzle-minded souls in the audience. Still, I found the whole of it to be pretty good, in truth to the point that I remained pretty invested the whole way through, though I'll admit that I was a bit put off by the abruptness and relative simplicity of the ending itself. Admittedly, I have a bit of a theory in regards to the why, but I'm not a lore channel, so maybe hit me up in the comments about it, also just so I don't spoil anything for anyone who actually wants to play the game. In the meantime, we have some mechanics to mull over, because while I went into House of Da Vinci with the awareness of it being a point-and-click adventure, I wasn't quite expecting the way it tackled the genre. In a sense, while there's certain elements of wandering the environment, searching for objects to collect and click in relatively logical fashions, there's also a fair amount of focus placed on manipulating a number of complex devices. While some of it's relatively simple, such as turning a crank, there's a rather substantial amount of conundrums that essentially focus on you feeling out the solutions to a number of Renaissance-flavored puzzle boxes, searching for widgets you can rotate, press in, or tug off. In fact, it's not uncommon to find yourself craning the camera around in search of a scuff mark or some hint of a movable part on an object, or even to dive into your inventory in order to further manipulate an item you've picked up until it's able to be properly used as a puzzle solution. And I should clarify something about the puzzles. While there is certainly a number which entails finding the proper item for a given situation, or how to properly manipulate an object, there is also a legitimately diverse array of brain-boggling conundrums to tackle, to the point that it wasn't actually all that uncommon for me to wind up stalling for bits just as I tried to figure out the rules which govern the puzzle so I could in turn solve them. They were in fact so legitimately complex that I found myself stepping away a few times in order to get a snack or make myself some coffee as I tried to piece together what the solution could possibly be. Not that the game left me entirely to my own devices. There's actually a pretty helpful hint system in place that gradually kicks in if you stalled at a certain segment for long enough, with particularly involved puzzles providing a small array of gradually unlocking hints so you can potentially get a nudge without spoiling the entire thing. Admittedly, it sometimes boiled down to me forgetting to use Giacomo's ace in the hole, the Oculus Perpetua, an item that provides you an internal look at the mechanisms you're solving, frequently necessary, as well as the occasional hint otherwise invisible to the naked eye. I mean, it also lets you travel in time, though that mostly serves as a vehicle for you to explore an alternate environment where the puzzle tends to be focused around resolving a problem in the past in order to fix the current environment, which in practice feels relatively straightforward, especially compared to the more in-depth brain teasers House of Da Vinci has in store for you. That said, I'll admit these segments did feel a bit weird, if only because, for some unfathomable reason, the past is essentially a frozen snapshot when you visit it. Whilst this does allow for some neat looking set pieces, like you wandering amidst a battle with people locked in combat, it's simultaneously weird because the rule isn't absolute. A ballista can still fire its bolts, a bell can still fall, a switch can still be turned. While these details are minor, it just makes the otherwise stillness of these segments stand out, especially when you measure them up against the rest of the game's set pieces. See, while the game has aspirations towards a sort of Renaissance aesthetic, in practice this mostly serves as a pretense towards having some incredibly elaborate devices to fiddle with, the likes of which would make contemporary crafters weep. Watching this super intricate puzzle box unfurl as you tinker with it, hidden compartments popping out or switches sliding neatly into place is visually satisfying, even if there's this sort of this is bordering on Magitech for how seamless this all looks, especially as you encounter some of the more elaborate elements. It is a lot of fun to poke around at though, especially given the details built into these things which often serve as hints, like the scrape marks I mentioned earlier on something meant to slide. If not immediately, then eventually. As for the audio front, well, I found the soundtrack to be serviceable enough, albeit a bit on the quiet side. That said, I did appreciate the sound effects for fiddling about with the various objects, and there's some genuinely decent voice acting in the mix, even if I was mildly hoping for some thick accents for that good, this is a Renaissance feeling. C'est la vie, or I guess, que sera, sera, to be a bit more linguistically appropriate. Also, I was a little bit weirded out by them saying Giacomo. I don't know if that's wrong. Feel free to comment on that in the comments, but that's how this game actually says it.
Giacomo.
Still, that brings us to our close, and the simple fact of the matter is, I do have a distinct regret when it comes to my time spent with this game. Rather pointedly, I'm kicking myself that I didn't play its predecessors first. While I don't actually know how well they compare to the latest entry, the high points established in this final one in the series, both in regards to the relative challenge and the variety in the puzzles, as well as the overall density of things to do, had me legitimately curious as to how well they measure up. Yes, I'll concede that the narrative beats for the game can be a little bit weird and ultimately somewhat anticlimactic, but I had a lot of fun throughout the journey and collecting the little background notes that help to flesh out the whole. And that extends to the visual elements too, regardless of how impractical the designs of the set pieces were or how much they started to stray into outright mysticism moments. There's just something acutely satisfying about seeing them play out in a similar way to seeing a secret passage or esoteric device activating in a Hollywood film. Sure, it's silly and super indulgent, but it's a fun moment for the visual artists to flex their stuff, and they do indulge themselves freely. So, what I'm trying to say is, if you're a fan of point and clicks and don't mind occasionally bashing your brains out against an especially fiendish puzzle, The House of Da Vinci 3 is a solid hit, and maybe enough to see me dip back into the earlier titles, though I feel I might leave that up to you folks in the comments. Anywho, thanks for tuning in! If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, again, there's the comments section. And if you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell. For the Discord savvy folks, there's also a link to my community, the Crit Hit Cauldron, which is in the video description, and to my Patreon, so you can support me and the other members of Crit Hit. Also to my Twitch, if you want to see me get dunked on in indie games live. That said, I'll catch y'all in the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.